Now, I've often complained about the Springville Police Department focusing on victimless crimes like marijuana possession, using the streets without a permit, loitering, instead of violent crimes like, recently a home invasion robbery. Back in 1984, an unsolved murder. My grandma was just wiped out of all of her life savings, and we know who the perpetrator was. He admitted to stealing the money, and we have evidence where she did not sign over her assets. It was his signature and not hers, and the police won't even investigate that. And I have just found something on the Young Turks which explain the reasons for this and why the cops would focus on victimless crimes like marijuana as opposed to violent crimes like murder or home invasion robbery or theft by deception or elderly abuse or other things. I'm very disappointed in the Springville Police Department. Back in 2010, I sent in a grandma request or a FOIA request asking them how much they make from civil asset forfeiture. Chief Finlayson replied, he didn't give me anything for that, but he replied in an email and says that he does not know of anything, any money that they get from asset forfeiture. Except for recently I saw on their webpage that they are having auctions for forfeited assets. So they must be getting some kind of money from asset forfeiture. So his email to me was a lie. From what I can tell, it was a lie. So I'm going to send in another FOIA request and ask them more about their civil asset forfeiture policies and ask them, how much they make off of arresting young kids for drugs. So let's just go ahead and watch what the Young Turks say about how police profit from marijuana arrests.
It turns out that police officials are increasingly ignoring violent crimes, and they are using all of their resources to arrest and prosecute people who have possession of marijuana. And there are significant incentives to do so. All right, so the Huffington Post actually did a really great report on this, and they lay out all of the different ways that police departments, local police departments, profit from arresting and prosecuting people who have possession of marijuana. So the first thing is that they get federal anti-drug grants, okay? And the way a police department is able to get those grants is if they can show that they have made a significant amount of arrests for marijuana and drug possession. All right, and this is a competitive thing. It's not like all police departments get it. You get this grant if you can show that you have arrested enough people.
All right, first of all, instantly, look at the incentive structure that they give you,
right?
Like, right or wrong, it's a real problem in your local community. It's not a problem in your local community. Who cares? You only get the money if you do our bidding, which is to arrest as many people for smoking marijuana and selling marijuana, etc., as possible. So, gee, I wonder why we got all these people locked up in jail, because they're literally getting paid to lock them up, and as much as possible. And then second of all, if you incentivize them to do that, obviously they're going to do that instead of other things.
Of course. Look, they're going to use all of their time and resources to arrest people when they know that arresting those individuals is going to mean that they're going to bring in money for doing so. So here's another example. When they suspect that someone might have possession of drugs, they can do something known as asset forfeiture. Okay, so for example, police can legally seize property from people merely suspected of drug crimes, and they can basically get a hold of the cash, and that cash goes back to the police department. It doesn't go back to the person who's arrested. When it comes to non-cash property, it's auctioned off, and that money goes back to the police department.
So, look, if you got raped, or you got seriously assaulted, and you lost an eye, etc., there's no profit in it for the cops. I mean, hopefully they'll get to it, right? But if you had a little bit of marijuana or cocaine or whatever in your Mercedes, hey, they got a Mercedes, and they get money from the federal government. Wow, gee, I wonder which one they're going to put more effort into.
Right, exactly. Look, there was a case of a woman in Chicago who was literally beaten to the point where she suffered a concussion. She woke up the following morning, and she went to the police. The police didn't care, so she went and did her own investigation to find out who the attackers were. Then she went to the police and said, look, here are the attackers, the names of these people, where they live, please arrest them, arrest them. Finally, after bugging them, the Chicago police decided, all right, fine, we'll arrest these guys, but stop bitching about it.
Yeah, stop complaining that you were beaten unconscious. Look, it didn't involve drugs, why would we care?
Right.
In fact, what she should have done instead of all that is, they beat me near death. Plus, I saw them smoking a joint. Then the cops are like, okay, we jump in.
Exactly. Got to get those federal anti-drug grants. All right, and then the last way that these police departments make money is that drug dealers are forced to reimburse the police departments for the resources that they spent to arrest and prosecute. And that's only with drug-related crimes.
Right. So again, if somebody came into your house, they attacked your kids, they robbed you of your precious possessions, well, since they don't have to pay it back to the cops, we'll get to it when we get to it, right? But you got a little bit of marijuana, let's make some money. You think this doesn't pervert how people, how those police departments react to these different crimes? You're crazy if you don't think that. Of course they respond to financial incentives.
And this is an increasing issue because if you look at the statistics, if you look at 1981 to 1995, there were a total of 33,775 marijuana arrests. However, between 1996 to 2010, there were more than 500,000 marijuana arrests.
Gee,
500,000.
Gee, I wonder if it had an effect. I can't quite tell.
And if that isn't enough, that, the police departments are operating on these shady principles of financial motivated crimes where they arrest crimes that are financially motivated only, not just, not violent crimes or things that are harmful to the community, but victimless crimes like marijuana possession. We're not talking about just marijuana selling or distributing or growing. We're talking about most of these arrests. In fact, over 90% of these arrests are just simple possession of marijuana. A kid's got a joint in his hand, and they arrest him for that. And when I was arrested, and I was also arrested by Springville Police Department when I was a teenager for possession of marijuana. When I was arrested, it hurt my career. It cost me $10,000 that I didn't have. I mean, I came from a poor family. Aside from paying the fines and bailing out of jail, I also had to pay a lawyer. And then I ended up trying to go and get a enlistment in the military, and I was accepted. My ASVABs I passed with flying colors, and everything was looking good, and the Air Force recruiter was ready to take me in. And then they did a background search on me and found that I had 2 possession of marijuana arrests at that point, and because I had more than one, they couldn't expunge it. If I only had one, they could have got rid of it, but since I had 2, they had to deny me military service. So then I was homeless for several years. I couldn't get a job. I had drug arrests, and I had, problems with my family because of it, and I had no money. I was in debt, and I couldn't pay my fines, so I actually had to leave Utah and jump bail because I couldn't go and, deal with the court system and pay all these fines and pay my lawyer and pay all these other things. I was an inexperienced 19-year-old kid who had no job experience, no education, and drug crimes on my record. And I never sold, I never got busted for growing or selling or anything like that when I was a kid. I got busted for a couple of grams of marijuana. In fact, I think it was Springville Police Department, and they arrested me for just a pipe and then a little bit of resin in the pipe, and that cost me a Class B misdemeanor for the possession of marijuana and a Class B misdemeanor for the possession of paraphernalia, and it ended up screwing up my life for quite a few years. Now, I'm very successful now, but shortly after that time in which I was, put through the court systems and roughed up by the jails and the courts and the judicial system, I had, very difficult time in life, and it ended up putting me on the streets for almost 2 years, 2.5 years actually. I was on the streets from 1997 until the year 2000. And that's documentable. I went to homeless ministries for those years, and they've got the records of this. And when I finally turned myself into jail, these homeless ministries wrote the judges and explained my situation to them on my behalf. Anyway, look at what happened in Pennsylvania as 2 U.S. judges plead guilty to selling children to private prisons in much the same way that happened to me when I was in Utah. Now, I don't know, what their motives were, but I was a child who was put in jail for a victimless crime. I was a teenager.
An unprecedented case of judicial corruption is unfolding in Pennsylvania. Several hundred families have filed a class action lawsuit against 2 former judges who pleaded guilty to taking bribes in return for placing youths in privately owned jails. Judges Mark Ciavarella and Michael Conahan are said to have received $2.6 million for ensuring that juvenile suspects were jailed in prisons operated by the companies Pennsylvania Child Care, and a sister company, Western Pennsylvania Child Care. Some of the young people were jailed over the objections of their probation officers. An estimated 5,000 juveniles have been sentenced by Cia Varela since the scheme started.
And another blog post that I made recently about this is corruption in Utah is at an all-time high, as 2 police chiefs are recently decertified on the 22nd of March for crimes that they committed. These are Utah County Police Chief of Spanish Fork, and the other police chief was of Grantsville, Utah. So it's obvious that police corruption, is high, but most very high in Utah. They were recently rated, according to KSL News, with a D rating in regards to corruption. You can see this recently at KSL. I'll show you the actual story here, and this is an epidemic. I mean, when there's hundreds of thousands of children being labeled as criminals for using a plant that grows naturally out of the ground because police have incentives financially to make them criminals, it is absolutely uncalled for. I gave the wrong date. This was March 19th when this came out. This was last Thursday. Studies give Utah a D for corruption risk, B plus for spending transparency, which is up from a C from last year when they were audited for this. This is absolutely necessary to fix this problem. Springville Police have ignored major crimes. I have proof of this because my grandma was a victim of the Springville Police ignoring major crimes that have happened to her, where we had a victim on a voice recording admitting to taking the money and apologizing and saying he'll pay it back, and then writing an email saying that he'll never pay it back, and yeah, I took the money, but you're never going to get it. And we have witnesses that testified to this, that say, yeah, he took the money and he abused this lady who was 90 years old, and he abandoned her and went to New Mexico after taking all of her life savings and left her for God knows what in Utah. And we have bad checks that were written from her account while my grandma was with this person. And he wrote her name in there, and it was obvious that it wasn't her signature. And I've shown this to the police. I've shown her signature on her driver's license, and I've shown the bad checks that were written on her account that have a different signature entirely to people who my grandma haven't talked to in 6 years. And then I also showed them, well, they actually told me about this, but we found out that my grandma's trailer, her mobile home, was sold without her consent, and she didn't even know about it until I came to pick her up. When she was abandoned, I was called and said, hey, your grandma's here all alone, you need to come pick her up. And when I came to pick her up, we finally found out that her trailer, her mobile home, that had been sold. And her signature's not even on the bill of sale. It's somebody else's signature, somebody else's name. Her name and her signature don't even show up on there. And she didn't get any of the proceeds. When I picked her up, she had 47 cents left to her name. And the police don't even care, because it's not profitable for them. Just like the Young Turks were saying, they'd rather investigate a possession of marijuana charge than defend this elderly old lady who's 90 years old and had all of her life savings wiped out from underneath her. So I just think that it's time to stand up to the police. I'm a little pissed about what they've done in regards to my situation, when I was a kid, and how they treated me. And so, yeah, sure, I've got a little baggage with the Springville Police Department, and if I didn't, I probably wouldn't even be concerned about this. Most people in Springville probably could care less. But until it comes down to their kids being labeled a criminal, put in jail, and having their lives turned upside down with a permanent record for a simple possession charge of a drug, an herb. I mean, my theory is that drugs don't make seeds, herbs do. This is an herb that grows out of the ground naturally like God intended, and it has never in history been known to kill anybody due to overdose. You can go to the Center for Disease Control at cdc.gov, and you look at how many people have died from marijuana. 0. You look at how many people have died from prescriptions, and there's tens of thousands every year, like 60,000 a year in the United States. And that's what the police do when they take the kids to jail for smoking marijuana. you know, when the kids get out, they go find something else that's harder and more dangerous, like prescription drugs. And so the police are pushing kids to go and kill themselves and use, you know, hardcore prescription drugs. It's sad.